Hi, welcome to G-Makes, and this is just a little speed modeling I did of a kendama. I just want to model things that I have around my apartment because I want to practice modeling, and the kendama is just something I have around my apartment. This is a sweets kendama, which is from a place up in Minneapolis, and you'll see there'll be a QR code in a little bit if you want to look at their sites or anything, but it's a good kendama. I'm not very good at kendama at all. But it's fun. It's something I just do when I'm bored or waiting for stuff to render. Anyways, here's me. You can see I put out my reference images that I took, and here's me modeling the ball of the kendama, which is pretty easy. It's just a sphere, and then I put a subsurf modifier on it just to make it a little smoother, and I shade smooth. I start with a cylinder for the actual kendama itself, for the body of it. And here's me just saving. And yeah, it's pretty simple. I mean, this is pretty straightforward modeling. It's pretty not complicated shapes. Again, a sphere, a UV sphere, and then a cylinder here. You can see me narrowing it. My reference is not quite 100% on a profile, and it's not quite level, because I just kind of quickly took them just to get the idea. So you'll see me kind of shift my the actual wireframe back and forth to kind of match certain parts of the image. But either way, there's me making those little things at the bottom, and here's me shifting it, as you can see, so I can just kind of match that width and get the overall shape. I'm kind of messing around with how these curves are going to work, and because it kind of tapers, it's not like a full triangle. And then here's me messing with the bottoms again, and I think pretty soon I start doing beveling. I shade smooth to see how it looks. Yeah, and here I start beveling all the curves. I bevel all the little edges just so they're not 100% sharp. You could do this with the bevel modifier as well, but then you don't get as much control. And I didn't want to use a subsurf because I just want a little more control. I'm hitting C to make sure that things are clamping, so they don't intersect. It's not super important here, but later it becomes a little more important. And I'm just kind of shifting things around, trying to match, manually doing everything with S, and also using these bevels to smooth things out. Again, it's going to shade smooth, and it's okay if it's not perfect because the actual kendama is not perfect. There was the top, the little tip right there. And yeah, so there we go. There's the kendama body. Pretty darn good. I have another cylinder, which I'm going to use for the cups. This one gets a little wonky for whatever reason. I fix it. You'll see what kind of happens. But again, since it's not completely profile, I'm kind of just gauging. I'm using a little of my artistic integrity for this model. And so yeah, you can see the cups are different sizes, which also helps to know. I try to go off just by this reference. I didn't have the kendama near my computer in real life. You can see here's where it goes wonky. I must have just been scaling along the z-axis, but that was pretty easily fixed. I was tempted to just delete it and just do it all again, but I just rescale everything. To make sure that everything's back to a circle, I just apply that scale in object mode. You just Control A, apply scale. And that fixed it. So I was pretty happy. I didn't have to, because in real time that was maybe like not quite 10 minutes, but it was still annoying. And you can see, I was seeing how it looked at scale and smooth shading, and now I'm going back and doing all the bevels. This is where clamping really helps. I kind of leave space anyway, but just in case they kind of intersect so that nothing gets weird. I'm pretty happy. There's a QR code if you want to pause and look at it, I guess. But here's me lining up just to make sure I kind of get the size of things right and how everything's looking. And here's me, because the kendama, it's cups on either end. You can't really see that, but I just know that. Again, I'm just doing it kind of from memory. So here I'm using proportional editing and just slowly going in. I'm looking at wireframe to kind of get that more round, even though you really super see it, and I'm not trying to animate this or anything, at least at the moment. So it's not super important if they actually fit. And here's me just beveling and shade smooth. And yeah, and I'm not quite happy with how that indent works, so I go back in and then I just kind of resize all the rings. Really, the actual kendama, you can even see it in my reference, does have a little bit more of an edge. It's not that super sharp curve, and I was right there thinking if I should add that. I do add it in this one a little bit more, so there's actually a little bit more. It's not just suddenly outside to inside, but it's not that big, and I'm going for fairly realistic, but not 100% photorealism. I'm just trying to get some modeling techniques and practice with these simple shapes. Nothing too complex. Here you go. This is with the clamp helps, and I bevel again. And that's the body of the kendama, pretty much done. I'm not doing any of the super fine details, like there's a little hole on one end, and I'm not going to model the bottom cup and the third cup just because for this still render you're not going to see that. And so here I go right into shading on the ball. I'm just pretty much matching what I have in my reference, so you can see I even use the color for my reference. I make sure the opacity of the image is up to 100, and then I just steal that color. It's fairly shiny and smooth, though there are some small details that really help this later. For doing all this, I'm not using texture, I'm not like assigning different textures to it. I just decide to use texture coordinates and separate by X, Y, and Z. And then I'm using the Z coordinates, and then I'm putting that in through a math node. Using greater than or less than depending on what I want to make some masks, and then mixing those together in different BSDF shaders. I could have used one for all the black stuff, but I just didn't realizing that I didn't have the hole on top, and so I forgot for a moment that I had my subsurf modifier, which I could have applied or just subdivided without that. So it looks not quite perfect, but again, I'm not going for 100% photorealism. Hear me selecting all the faces, which again would have been easier if I turned off the subsurf. I just apply a color to it. I don't go back to this and use the kendama texture, even though that's probably what I would do if I was again trying to be 100% realistic or had a slightly different angle. But here's me just doing more textures. I have all the black and blue, but now I want that white at the bottom. At this moment I had decided to not do the white stripe just because I was like, I didn't want to do all the separation, and I was fine with just the simple 3 color with a little bit on top. So there, see, it's again the same thing, just using the coordinates, and you see, I think I'm done with the ball at this point, but I'm not. So I go start with the kendama, I take that color again from the reference. Could have used a image texture, but I was lazy, even though this is actually more work, but I don't have to deal with a UV map or anything. So I just used a wave texture, set it to, I think, the generated coordinates, and then I think it's on to Y or whatever you can see in the video. And then it just looks like the slices of wood, it looks like the grain. And I do a little bump on that, even though maybe the grain wouldn't have the bump. And then I add all those little details from the wood. Again, I kind of mix these colors together, and then I also move this one into the bump. So that way the wood has a little texture, even though kendama is pretty smooth. It just helps, and will help with some of the light bounce stuff, because I'll render this in cycles. I'm debating whether I need those little streaks you see, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to do those, because I didn't really have a plan going into this. And I decided to do them because I do add a lot of variety, so I'm going to use a noise texture, and then I stretch. I use the coordinates, the UV coordinates this time because it looked the best, and then I just stretch them along an axis. Just give them a little more of that stretch so they're not all quite the same. Again, using color ramps to make things make them more contrasted or not. And again, another mix and put that in the bump and all that. Here's me back to the ball, thinking, because I didn't like how shiny and smooth it was, especially compared to now the newly textured kendama. So I go back to get those little scratches that you get, because even though the ball is hard and the kendama is not a super hard wood, it's pretty soft, you still get those little dents, those little scratches just from hitting the point and everything. So I go back and I use a noise texture again, and it's just with a bump node, and again a color ramp. That's way too strong, so I tone that down. I also, here you'll see me, I add a middle slider, I add a gray, just so I can control that fall off a little bit more. I'm not sure if this quite does anything, but at least made me feel better about it. So I kind of zoom in, dial those in. And for this render, this is nearing the end of it. I keep it all the way up to the top, even though in the real kendama ball there is nothing on the top. There's none of those scratches because the top never hits the point. But what I do in my final render, which you saw in the beginning, is I just take out the bump from that final black color, so there's no bump on that, so it's smooth on top. Here's me setting up basic lighting, which I changed for my final render, because when I was editing this video I went back, I wasn't quite happy with it. You also see the ball is completely smooth in cycles. This is because I was using, I think, the UV or the normal coordinates or something for those textures, when it should have been the generated. I was very confused by this, but then I just needed to use the generated coordinates. Here you see me wanting to add that white stripe because I thought it was a little too bland. I didn't know how I was going to get the separation, so I didn't bother with it, but I just used the compare node to get that color in between, and I kind of mess around to try to get the colors right. Can't remember quite where they should all go, but I get it in the end, and I have that nice white stripe, and it does add quite a lot of detail and just makes it feel more like the original, but also just breaks up that monotony of the black right there at the bottom. So it's a nice design, so why not use it? And yeah, that's pretty much it. You can see I'm messing with the texture coordinates. It's a lot of fun. I actually really like this method. Here I finally get the stripe, and then it's just messing with it even more. I was really happy with how the kendama turned out. It's still not quite perfect. I think the grain is a little too strong, but it was fully procedural. Looks, in my opinion, really good. Looks like the wood. I didn't spend too long on this total thing. This is sped up like 400%, so it's really just like an hour 15, I think, from me opening the file to me having a final render, minus, and then I guess minus or add on the times I went back to like fix the lighting or make the texture coordinates better. But those were just small tweaks already done. And you can see this is the reverse of what I want, so I go back and I just mess around to get it. There we go. It's a little easier to see in the textured mode. So there we can see the material preview, and I bring everything back just to check it. I like how that looks. I mess with the black again a little bit. And now the last thing is the string, which I'm gonna have to do. I could have just modeled this, but I decided, because I'm lazy again, I decided to do a fabric simulation, fabric sim for this string, which kind of messes me up later when I was trying to figure out what to do for this, or how to edit this video, because I couldn't do any like animations without messing up that fabric sim. And here you see I start with a circle, and then I kind of stretch it to the general shape. And I'll delete that half, and I subdivide it a whole bunch, and I kind of line up the points with where they would be. And I create a vertex group. This is a basic fabric and cloth simulation kind of thing. Easy way of doing rope. I scale it, you see, proportionally. And I have that vertex group on both the points, and I use that as the pin group just here in a bit, right down here on the fabric. And there we go, it's the pin group. And now, of course, it just falls, and it kind of falls through my collision object, which is the ground, because it has no mass at all. I keep trying to figure out if it's a collision, the space between it, or whatever, the distance, but no, it's just because it has no mass. So I'm thinking a shrink wrap or something like that. What do I go with here? Yeah, this is another standard way of doing it, but I don't like it because then it scales really weird. Maybe there's a better way of doing it, but I just do a very weird workaround where I convert it to a curve, and then I use that for volume and geometry, and then I convert that curve back into a mesh. So it's not perfect, but you know, I was lazy and I didn't actually want to have to hand model a curve or anything and set it on the ground. So this was just my way of doing it. Then I have to redo that vertex group, and I play it, and it works. And I just go with the first simulation I get. I don't mess with anything. It could be longer, like the real one's pretty long, but I apply a color to it and kind of give it a fabric-y look, so pretty opaque, and just get that color right. And that's a kendama done with. Here it is, look, in cycles in my render. I bake the simulation just because I'm not going to mess with it, and it'll help my rendering, and if I want to play back or anything, it'll go faster. I was thinking about subdividing again, but I didn't do that because I didn't want to have to rebake everything. Figuring out a lighting setup, which again, I keep this basic one. You'll see, and you can kind of see how it changes between the renders, but the idea is the same, of like a key light and then a backlight, or whatever it's actually called. And yeah, that's the first of what hopefully will be this series of modeling things around my apartment. This first one is this kendama that I have that I just mess around with. I learned some tricks here and there. I'm setting up the floor, and here I do a basic kind of studio trick in Blender, where I have this plane, and then I just extrude out the back to make it vertical, and then I add a bevel. And you get that smooth, like you have a sheet against your wall. And then I change the color to something that I like. It's a little pink to contrast the blue and kind of make the brown, the tan pop out a little bit. I don't know color theory really, but this looks nice to me, so that's what I went with, this kind of peach color. I also make it fully, I look at the visibilities, and I go into the film profile and the colors, and I choose filmic, and then I choose high contrast, and here's my original render. You can see the ball is completely smooth, so I'm not quite happy with it. That was my test, just so I can go in the compositor. So here is my final render. or that was my original render. Here's my new render. You can see that comparison with some of the AO and that the shiny ball, but here's it with some dents in that ball and silly AO, but a little softer lighting. I also upped the resolution a little bit so that way it would just play a little better and I can mess around with it. So yeah, that's me modeling a kendama in Blender 3.0. This kendama, in fact. And if you'd like to see me model more things, subscribe and like the video if you did. And if you have any suggestions for items or things you'd like to see me model or tutorials you'd like to see me to do, leave them below. If you have a crazy object, I might just have it in my apartment to model. Well, that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and practice kendama in the real life and not on the computer. You take care and I'll see you next time.